Okay, so here's a trade I took a loss on. I erased all of the TA on it because I'm just going to use my hand because the thing was just like a spider web of lines. But here's a perfect example of a trade that didn't work out. Your thesis was invalidated and you took a loss, but the way you took a loss is very important. I did not take a loss at the right moment. Okay, so we have Morgan Stanley here breaking below this compression on a day it's got relative weakness right through here. And it looks exciting because there's a ton of room for this thing to move. So this could end up being something that you add to and take a huge win on. Now, it's not necessarily showing a ton of relative weakness right away, according to the market. But what I want to see, though, is this breakdown start to build momentum, like start to raise in volume, etc. And hopefully what I'm doing, is I'm catching this move like before it happens. So even though it's confirmed technically, it hasn't confirmed with relative weakness and volume yet. So the technicals are good, the risk reward is good, but the relative strength or relative weakness and the volume isn't there yet. That's what I want to see. So I enter short right here on this little candle, on this little breakdown through here with a stop like way above, way up top through there, because what I want to know first is, maybe this thing might rip completely against me and chop around a little bit and go back down. I could scratch or take a smaller win or something like that. I want to give it a lot of breathing room because it hasn't confirmed aspects of the trade yet. So I enter, and then as this thing starts getting better and better and better, like starts breaking down more and more, I'm like, oh, look at that. It's coming right back down to the bottom. So I add again right through there. Uh-oh, that's no good. It's back up above, but then it's starting to come back down again. So I add again, and I'm like, oh yeah, this thing is building, it's building volume. It's just finished up through here. It's going to build more relative weakness. I think the market's going to go down. Everything's going to be good. So I keep adding to this thing, right? So now I'm at a size where I can't take a loss above this compression. I have to take a loss maybe like down in here for a max size loss. So I start to see that, you know what? This thing isn't really doing what it should be doing at all. So what I did is I scratched off half of the size. I took a very, very tiny loss on half the size, and now all of a sudden my stop isn't down there. It's boom, back up to the kind of high of the compression. I would say my stop was maybe somewhere around there. Okay, so this thing is just kind of in limbo, no man's land. It hasn't really gone against me, but it also hasn't really done what I wanted it to do yet. So it's kind of in, like, nothing's really happening, right? It's just wonking around through here. So now we start to get this upward movement here the next day, popping right up above. And now I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm fine because I've given it a lot of room. It doesn't have the size on it anymore. This is just going to be like a rip up, and then I see this nice hammer and it's going to drop back down. But it kind of doesn't. It just hangs out up top and it just chills. And remember, I have smaller size on it, so there's more room. But this thing isn't doing what I thought it was going to do yet, and so I'm just holding on to it. It's got relative strength right through here, and now it's just holding this high right around here. So Harry's in this trade as well, and he takes the loss on his position right about here. Look at that. So Harry gives it a chance to move around a little bit, and he took the entry at the same time I did. And then it chops around a little bit, and then as soon as it starts building relative strength again, it's not a little pullback profit take back down to the bottom. It's changing directions inside the compression. That's where he takes the loss. But because I had already sized down, I thought, oh, I'm good. I can give this thing more room. My max loss is like a couple bucks higher up. So why don't I just give this more room? I mean, it's still in compression. It's not going anywhere, and it's a bank stock too, so I mean, any sort of bad news can just drop it, right? And then on top of that, what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to copy the trader. I wanted to be a contrarian. Isn't that crazy? Sometimes the right exit is exactly when everybody else is exiting, but you don't want to exit because you want to be different, and that can mess up your trading completely. So that's the next day we're hanging out through there. So I'm just hanging out in this thing. I'm still holding it. And I said in the chat, I said, hey, I'm going to give it more room because I'm sized to be able to give it more room. So now the next day happens and it just rips. And while it's ripping, I'm thinking, okay, well, it's a day before a holiday. So this should be a dead day. So this should just be like chop up and chop down. It's just going to chop around in the compression any day now, right? It's just going to go and go and go and go. And what the heck? Oh, okay. But now I see on this thing, on the 1OP, it's creating a giant divergence. So 1OP is dropping, it's about to cross, and I'm like, this thing's gonna rip on me. And I start getting scared. And I start getting scared because this thing is very close to my max loss, which is like right there. That's my max loss. So I need to make a decision right there now. Even though the technical analysis of it isn't showing a max loss, I'm starting to get fearful and starting to get afraid. So I take the loss right at 83 or 84.57 or something like that. I take the loss right there. I'm like, good, I got out, I'm good. But then the rest of the day, it does jack shit. And then at the end of the day, it drops again. So it's kind of bearish. It's got relative weakness again. And I took the loss there because I got afraid. Now, here's a perfect example of why these types of losses can mess you up. And this is not, I didn't execute this right. I should have taken the loss exactly when Harry took the loss, or when I was scratching off my position, just take a tiny loss and just get out of the whole thing. This is what this next candle looks like, but when I took the loss, this thing was right solid right up top. I had to let the D1 candle finish. So now there's a chance that this thing just waves right back down because the SPY candle finished at the high of the day, but this one didn't. It pulled right back. So obviously there's some sort of sellers up through there. So I had sized my stop just a little bit too off. I should have scratched off. So this basically tells you that there's zones of probability when you're trading. And it has to do with the time elapsed. So let's say right down here, I want something to happen. Oh, my thesis didn't work. A high probability for a good quality loss is right there. The next high probability for a good loss is a break of this next level of sellers. It's not in the middle. And oftentimes we'll take terrible wins or terrible losses because we're in between probability zones. So we aren't hanging out down here, and we haven't tested this area up here. We're like in the middle. We're like kind of halfway there, losing the most possible money we can before it gets a chance to reject again. And this happens all the time, and I call it like the flinch. And this is the same thing as saying being nimble or be patient. Nimble would be here, patient would be waiting for a rejection, and then maybe the next day, if it breaks up into there, or hell, maybe you're sized for even a rejection up in there. But you're leaning on the D1 now, right? So you're nimble or you're patient, which means you need to give it time. Harry left because he had options. So by the time he would give this time to test, to reject, come back down, the theta's probably burned through too much. But I had shares. So here's a perfect example now of knowing when to take your loss or when to take your win. Is it nimble? Is it patient? But you can't be both. You can't do that middle ground because oftentimes you're better off letting it go further and retest or just cutting it right away. And that middle zone is where you take the biggest hit to your profit factor. Hopefully that kind of made sense, where that like middle no man's zone can mess you up. It's kind of a complicated thing to understand, but that's what nimble versus patient means. And that's what I mean by probability zones. And your goal as a discretionary trader is to, within the context of the market, see where there is high probability and also determine when there will be high probability next, and to wait long enough for those next moments to occur, and don't just take the biggest loss in between.